Why did we let the monster mother go? Confession of a juror in the Casey Anthony case. Prologue. I had been sitting in courtrooms for 20 years in a row. Not as a journalist, not as a lawyer, not even as a judge. I was a juror. A man who, time and again, was chosen to listen to someone else's truth and someone else's grief, and then, together with 11 others like me, decide guilty or not guilty. Over the years, I had seen dozens of trials, from petty thefts to cases that made national headlines. Every trial was like a new theater to me. The actors changed, but the stage remained the same. Dark wooden panels, the shining seal above the judge's head, prosecutors in dark suits, lawyers trying to appear confident, and defendants whose faces always held a mix of fear and hope. I had long known, no case is ever clean. Behind every protocol were human stories, complicated, tangled, sometimes terrifying. But this time was different. The case that landed on my lap in June 2011 in Orlando would change my view of the courtroom forever. Her name was on everyone's lips: Casey Anthony, a young woman accused of murdering her own little daughter, 2-year-old Caylee. America followed this trial like a television drama. On the news, in bars, in beauty salons, even in supermarket lines, everywhere people were asking the same question: did she do it or not? I wasn't allowed to speak about the case outside the courtroom, but I knew this would be the hardest trial of my life. Chapter 1. The Summons. I received the summons in May. It read, "You are summoned as a prospective juror in the case of the state of Florida versus Casey Anthony." I confess, my heart sank. I had already heard of the case. Who hadn't? Television screens showed photographs of a smiling little girl, Caylee. Her face had become a symbol of tragedy. Next to it, the portrait of her mother, Casey, dark-haired, big-eyed, sometimes staring into the camera with defiance, sometimes with confusion. At home, my wife looked at the envelope and shook her head. "This is the case of a lifetime," she said. "It won't be easy for you." And she was right. Even during jury selection, we felt the pressure of all the cameras in the country. Dozens of journalists filled the room. Each of us knew our decisions, our words, even our facial expressions might become fodder for the press. Judge Perry, a stern man with a deep voice, looked at us as if testing whether we had the strength to render a fair verdict. He warned us immediately, "This trial may last several months. You will be isolated from the outside world. No TV, no newspapers, no phones. You will become prisoners of the law." I saw some of the candidates flinch. Some tried to avoid the responsibility. Some spoke of sick relatives, others of work problems. But I stayed. I felt that 20 years of experience bound me to endure this test as well. When my name was called among those selected, I took a deep breath. The so-called trial of the decade had begun. Chapter 2. First impressions of the defendant. On the day of opening statements, the courtroom was packed. TV cameras filled entire rows. People even crowded the hallways, trying to catch a glimpse of what would unfold inside. When Casey Anthony was brought in, a faint rustle went through the courtroom. She looked much younger than her 25 years. A white blouse, hair neatly tied, her expression shifting between calm and defiance. She did not cry, nor did she lower her gaze. On the contrary, she occasionally cast quick glances at the journalists, at the prosecutor, even at us, the jurors. I felt suspicion stir inside me. Was this the look of a mother who had lost her child? Or the look of someone playing a role? Prosecutor Jeff Ashton began his opening statement. His voice was firm, his words cold. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, before you is a case of the greatest crime imaginable. A mother killed her little daughter. And not only did she kill her, she hid the child's death for months, partied with friends, lied to her parents, to the police, to everyone around her. We will prove that Casey Anthony deliberately took her child's life to free herself from the responsibilities of motherhood." His words hung in the air like ice. I heard someone in the back rows quietly gasp. Then defense attorney Jose Baez took the floor. His manner was completely different, soft, almost fatherly. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen," he said, "what you will hear from the prosecution is a frightening fairy tale. But a fairy tale is not the same as the truth. We will show you that Caylee died tragically, but accidentally, and that her mother, frightened of her strict father's reaction, tried to hide the truth. This is not a story of murder, but of family drama, of secrets that destroy lives." I watched Casey's face closely. She sat with her hands clenched. Only when her lawyer mentioned her father did she flinch. It was subtle, but I noticed. Unease grew within me. There was more darkness here than light. Chapter 3. The Courtroom Atmosphere. The courtroom reminded me less of a temple of justice than an arena. I had seen dozens of trials, but never so many people in the gallery, never so many cameras buzzing like a swarm of bees. Every move, every breath of the defendant was captured by dozens of lenses. When we, the jurors, entered our seats, all eyes turned to us. I felt the weight of responsibility so heavily it seemed my shoulders shrank. Some jurors looked away, others tried to stay calm, but I knew inside each of us doubts were boiling. Judge Perry set strict rules. No comments outside the courtroom. No gestures, no exchanged glances, no smiles. Jurors must be statues. But how can one be a statue when a human drama unfolds before your eyes? In the first days, we heard detectives testify. They described how the young mother of a missing child hadn't reported her absence for a month. How she invented stories about a nanny Zenaida, who supposedly kidnapped the child. How she claimed to work at Universal Studios though she had long been fired. We drove with her to the studio, one officer testified. She confidently led us down long corridors. Suddenly she stopped and admitted, "Okay, I don't work here." I saw some jurors raise their eyebrows. Why would a mother lie so blatantly? Then came photos from parties. Casey smiling, holding a cocktail, hugging friends, dancing. All this while her daughter was likely already dead. Silence thickened in the room. I heard a woman in the press rows whisper, "Monster." I tried to stay objective. Presumption of innocence is the foundation of law. But my heart would not obey my reason. That evening, in the bus that took us back to the hotel where we were sequestered, no one spoke. Only when the doors closed did one juror, a stocky man in his 40s, whisper, "If this is true, I have no words." Nor did I. Chapter 4. The Prosecutor and His Strategy. In the following days, the prosecution began assembling their puzzle. Their goal was simple and terrifying: to prove that Casey intentionally killed her daughter. Jeff Ashton, the lead prosecutor, held himself confidently. His manner was sharp, detached. He presented piece after piece of physical evidence, as if laying stones in a wall around the defendant. In Casey's car trunk, he said, showing photographs, "We found traces indicating decomposition. The smell was so strong that even experienced officers said, 'It smells of death.'" The words "smells of death" cut through me like a cold blade. I noticed other jurors shifting in their seats. Someone coughed, someone looked away. Then the prosecution presented experts. A chemist explained that traces of compounds associated with human decomposition were found in the trunk. Another spoke of a hair found in the car, resembling human hair post-mortem. Then an image, a piece of sticky tape with cartoon character prints. It was found near Caylee's skull. The prosecutor claimed the mother had used this tape to cover her daughter's mouth. I felt the air grow heavier. It seemed even Judge Perry, accustomed to horrific details, swallowed hard. The most striking evidence were recordings of calls from Casey's mother, Cindy Anthony. She screamed into the phone, reporting that her daughter's car smelled like death somewhere. Her voice was filled with despair. "This is the voice of a mother who knows the worst has happened," Ashton said. "And before you sits the daughter who is responsible." I looked at Casey. She sat still, but her lips trembled. Her hands were clenched so tightly her knuckles turned white. Inside me, two thoughts warred. The first, Everything is obvious evidence, lies, behavior. The second, maybe I am too quick to believe in guilt. I remembered countless trials where the prosecution seemed flawless, but in the end, the truth turned out differently. That evening, at the hotel, the jurors gathered in the common room. Conversations circled around mundane things. Who had lunch? How hard it was without phones. Yet I noticed a growing preoccupation with guilt or innocence in everyone's eyes. A woman, a middle-aged African-American teacher, finally spoke aloud. Honestly, it's hard for me to believe a mother could do this. I want to hear the other side. Her words hung in the air. Others just nodded. We all understood. The defense would now present its case, which could either break us or reinforce the prosecution's case. Chapter 5. The Defense and its Line. After weeks of hearing the prosecution and their experts, Casey's attorney, Jose Baez, took the stage. He was nothing like Ashton, warm, expressive, even theatrical. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, he began, pacing the courtroom. I know how difficult it was to hear all these horrifying details. But let me remind you, there is no proof of murder. Only assumptions, interpretations, and emotions. He walked back and forth across the floor, speaking freely, without papers, confidently. We do not deny that Caylee is dead, but her death was a tragic accident. The little girl drowned in the backyard pool, and her grandfather, George Anthony, in a panic, instructed Casey to conceal the tragedy. These words hit the courtroom like a thunderclap. We jurors exchanged glances. George Anthony, the former police officer who had been in the gallery from the start, lowered his head and covered his face with his hands. Baez paused, savoring the effect. Why did Casey lie? Why invent stories? Because she had lived in fear of her father her entire life. Because in that family, secrets are hidden, not discussed. He leaned over the table, raising several sheets of paper. The prosecution wants you to believe in a monster mother. I say, before you as a victim. A woman broken from childhood, who grew up under control and pressure. Then he said what made the room freeze. Casey told me that her father and brother sexually abused her during her childhood. A chill ran through me. This was no longer just a case about a child's death. It was an explosion of family trauma tearing the heart apart. A murmur rose in the courtroom. Judge Perry struck the gavel sternly. Quiet. George Anthony sat rigid, face pale. Baez ended his opening statement. This trial is not about murder. It is about a family hiding its secrets. Casey is not a killer. She is a woman driven to despair. I noticed some jurors pondering. Others turned away, unwilling to even hear the words. But we all knew it would get even harder. Chapter 6. Prosecution Witnesses. The prosecution, to maintain momentum, began calling key witnesses. First came Casey's mother, Cindy Anthony. She looked tired but determined. Her voice trembled as she recalled the day she realized her granddaughter was missing. I called the police, she said, because my daughter constantly lied. First, that Caylee was with a nanny, then at the beach, then at Universal Studios. But I knew it wasn't true. I found the car and smelled. Her voice broke. The smell of death. The prosecutor quietly asked, "Did you love your granddaughter?" Cindy lifted tearful eyes. She was my world. Silence fell again. We saw a woman who lost her child and might see her own daughter condemned. Next, Casey's brother, Lee, spoke about the tension in the family and Casey's strange behavior when Caylee went missing. His words were restrained but carried pain and resentment. Then friends of the defendant testified. They spoke of parties Casey attended while the child was supposedly with the nanny. One showed a photo of Casey holding a cocktail, smiling, wearing a t-shirt saying, "Life is good." The prosecution displayed the photo on the big screen. "Life is good," Ashton repeated. "This is what a mother looks like when her child is already dead." We, the jurors, stared at the screen. Inside me, two voices battled. One screamed this was evidence of heartlessness. The other reminded me that young people sometimes hide despair behind smiles. The most shocking evidence came from Casey's jail calls. She cried not so much about her daughter, but about no one helping me get a lawyer. Do you hear that? The prosecutor said. No mention of Caylee, only herself. After the recordings, many jurors slumped in their chairs. It seemed the prosecution was winning. Yet the defense's witnesses were next, promising a different, even darker version. Chapter 7. Defense Witnesses. When the defense took the stand, the courtroom was heavy with tension. The prosecution had built an almost impenetrable wall of evidence. Yet Baez acted differently. He wasn't trying to demolish the wall all at once. He removed the bricks one by one. First, a medical expert testified. I cannot determine the exact cause of Caylee's death. The skull was found without soft tissues. There is no evidence of strangulation, poisoning, or any deliberate harm. The prosecutor immediately objected. But we found the tape near the skull. The expert shrugged. Near it, yes. But we cannot know if it was there initially or placed later. This was the first crack. Then forensic pathologists critiqued the results of the novel chemical analysis of air in the car trunk. They argued that the method was unproven and that data could be interpreted in multiple ways. Science must be precise, one of them repeated. Here, we only have assumptions. I looked at the prosecution. Their faces were stone. They knew the defense was stripping their weapons away, bit by bit. Then George Anthony, Casey's father, was called. Baez asked him directly, "Did you ever abuse your daughter?" "Never," George exclaimed, his voice full of pain. "That is a filthy lie. Did you know about the backyard pool where your granddaughter could have drowned?" "Yes, but," he faltered, "I never saw her fall in." His hesitation only raised more questions. Some jurors were jotting notes, though we were only allowed general remarks. The defense also called a psychiatrist who described behavioral patterns of a woman who endured trauma. He explained that Casey learned to lie and hide problems because she had no space for truth in childhood. She looked carefree at parties? Baez asked. It was a mask. That is how people who fear showing their real pain act. I didn't know what to think. Before us was a woman already written off as a monster. Yet now other details emerged. Childhood trauma, fear of her father, the possibility of an accidental death of her child. A seed of doubt grew in my heart. And in court, doubt is dangerous. Chapter 8. Juror Deliberations. Back at the hotel that evening, tension was almost physical. We sat in silence, each lost in our thoughts. Finally, one juror, a tall, thin man named Michael, spoke. "You know, I'm not sure she's guilty." Silence fell. The middle-aged teacher responded. "Are you serious? She lied to everyone, all the time." "Yes," he said, "but lying does not equal murder. I want evidence." And there is none. I remembered Judge Perry's instructions. Your verdict must be based solely on evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. That sentence echoed in my mind again and again. That night, we argued long. One woman insisted. "Look at the photos. No normal mother would act like that." Another countered. "How many people have we seen hiding grief behind a mask? Behavior is not evidence." Then Michael asked a question that hung in the air. Can any of us say, beyond a reasonable doubt, that we know how Caylee died? No one answered, because no one did. Chapter 9. Tension before the verdict. The last days of the trial felt like a storm ready to break. Judge Perry read instructions for us, jurors, each word etched in stone. You must evaluate only the evidence presented in court. Do not consider emotions, assumptions, or outside opinions. Your task is to determine if the prosecution has proven guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. I felt as though he were looking straight at me, as if he knew I wavered most. Prosecutor Ashton delivered his closing. She lied. She enjoyed life while her child was dead. The smell of death was in her car. Tape was found near her daughter's skull. This was not accidental. It was intentional murder. His words hit like hammer blows. Baez replied, "You heard. No evidence of murder. No exact time of death, no cause of death. Only guesses. In our legal system, guesses are not grounds to send someone to the chair. He paused, looking directly at us. If you have even one doubt, you must acquit. His words pierced me like a thorn. When we left the courtroom for the final deliberation, the tension was so thick you could almost smell fear. We all knew our decision would make history. Chapter 10. The final night of deliberations. In the jury room, we sat for hours. Slowly, each person voiced their opinion. I don't see evidence of murder, Michael said. So my vote is not guilty. She is guilty, a woman snapped. She lied. Her behavior was terrible. Behavior doesn't equal crime, another man countered. Arguments flared again and again. Some pounded fists, others nearly cried. We knew our decision would divide the country. I lay on my bed at night, staring at the ceiling, asking myself, what do I truly know? I knew the child was dead. I knew the mother lied. But did I know she killed her? No. I felt torn. As a human, I felt rage. As a juror, I had to follow the law. In the morning, we gathered. Gradually, one by one, the jurors leaned toward one conclusion: insufficient evidence. Doubt remained. When we left the room, my knees shook. I realized we had just rendered the most controversial verdict of my life. Epilogue. The courtroom was dead silent as the jury foreperson stood and read. We, the jury, find the defendant, Casey Anthony, not guilty of first-degree murder. A roar erupted, shouts, sighs, even tears. Casey burst into tears, hugging her attorney. The prosecutors sat pale, like statues. I watched, feeling a double-edged truth. I knew we followed the law. Evidence was lacking. But my heart cried another truth. Where is justice for little Caylee? Where is the truth? As we left the courthouse, reporters swarmed the bus. They shouted questions, but we could not respond. I saw signs: murderer free and shame on the jury. Later, my wife said, the whole country thinks you made a mistake. But I knew, mistake or not, we acted according to the law. And law is not always the same as justice. Years have passed, yet I still remember Caylee's eyes from the photographs. They haunt me at night. I keep asking myself the same question: what if we really did make a mistake? This trial left a scar. I can no longer see court as a theater. To me, it is now a place where people seek truth but find only its shadow. I am a juror who has attended court for 20 years. But after the Casey Anthony case, I understood. Sometimes the hardest decision is not the one your heart wants, but the one your mind demands. Subscribe to the channel. Share this video. Give it a like.